key flow layout with a bunch of buttons on it on here. Now, the way this works is as you add new controls, so add a new button here to the flow layout, it gets added to the end of the layout. And then when I resize this, that's how it goes there. So now if you want to change the order something is, though, you just select the control and you just change its Z order. So we do this, we'll say send it back, and that put that up there on the top. Now I actually want that a little bit narrower. So let's go ahead and shrink this guy down. Boop. And I can tweak it more later. Clearly I need to mess with my alignment here on this one. Let's go ahead and make it twice as big, maybe. Okay, anyway, you can play with this. This control here with this button with the diagonal text, that's a button with no text and then a label on it. The label is parented on the button, and then I've just rotated the text on the button. Just trying to have a little fun with that one there. Let's take this, make it a little smaller. I should have tweaked that a little bit more beforehand. And let's make this taller here so I keep the... Okay. So this is an example actually of something I find that's useful with the flow layout is that I can keep this here always together. I always know this is going to be above it. I always know this is going to be the right of that edit box, no matter how this lays out. So let me run this here. And if I maximize this, which is not very exciting, and then however I resize this, etc., it just flows those all out. Now, also we mentioned that you have the flow break. So it added the flow break right here. Now, if I want to put some more buttons on here, let's see, button. Oh, it put them on the flow break. Because the flow break is a layout, and so it gets those added to it. All right, so let's scroll up here and put the one there. Okay, so you see now they are broken there. So there's a gap as I resize this. And so you can use lots of flow breaks there. And the same thing with flow breaks, if you want to change the Z order, you just select the flow break and then use control bring to front, move to back type situation. So there you go. That's the big thing with the flow layout. Very useful if you're going to have controls that you want to just flow into the space, like I said, like text in a paragraph. Grid layout is really useful if you want to have a grid of controls like you see here. So the way grid layout works is you set on the layout the item width and item height, and then all the controls you place on there will have that item width and item height. Now, if you notice the second image down at the bottom, you see some things at different sizes, and that's because those controls have margins specified. So by specifying a margin, then it shrinks it down to fit within the margins. So you see there, the margins are set to fill the rest of that space up. So then as you resize the container, then the way the controls fit in there changes. So now we've got a grid layout down here. Now at first blush, when I resize this, you see it flows like a flow control does. But the difference is the grid layout is I can't resize these individual controls. I can try to, but nothing happens. If you want to change the size of the controls, you come over here and find where it says item height and item width, and you change this. So we can change this to 50 and make this a little smaller, or we can change it to 80 and make them all bigger. Okay, now you notice there's one here that is a different size than the rest of them, and that is done by setting the margins on it. So there's the margins are set on this guy here. So there's the grid layout. It behaves the same way when I run it as at design time when I resize the container that it's in. So when you want to have a lot of controls that are all the same size, grid layout's the way to go. Now it's different than the grid panel layout. The grid panel layout, you create a grid, okay, and then each control you set the width, height, align, and anchors of those controls. And then you can then place those controls in the cells that are created of that grid. Okay, so you don't specify the size of or the location of the controls. You instead specify which cells they belong into, but you then instead specify the sizes. So it's a little more flexible for being able to customize the behavior of the controls than the grid layout. Also, as you see here, the controls can span multiple cells. So let's take a look at the grid panel layout. We'll go ahead ahead and align it to client. Now, the way the grid panel layout works is you notice we have a grid. We have 2 columns and 2 rows, so 4. And here's we have collections here. There's a column collection and a row collection. That's what we're going to look at first. Column collection, row collection. And we'll go ahead in here and add a new row. Now, right now, the rows are set to percentages, and they're set to each 50. Now, if I add a new row, it's going to set the value to 0, because it always makes sure these add up to be 100. Now, if I want to make this one, if I want to divide it 30% each way, then I have to, I can set it to like 60%. And what's going to happen is I'm going to go through and do some automatic adjustment here. I found if you just set it to 33 a few times, pretty soon it gets pretty close because it keeps auto-adjusting that. You can go and modify the other ones or do it different ways. That's what I usually do. Find whatever works best for you, though. So now you notice we have 3 rows and 2 columns. Now when I add a control here, it automatically puts it in the first cell, and add another control. Puts it in the second cell. Add another control, puts it in the third cell. Now, if we want to move the controls around, there is a collection, control collection. There we go. So here's the 3 buttons I put down here. And I can come to these and I can say, oh, let's take button 3 and let's make it span 2 columns. And now button 3 spans 2 columns. Or I can put it into row 3. Yeah, I can't put it in row 3 because there's not that many rows. Row 2. So 0, 1, 2. So that's how you move the controls around within the grid layout. So that's what all there is to it. Grid layout, you still come in here, you can still set the size of these. So I can say, or I can set it here. Oops, I'm having trouble with my mouse. There we go. Make it bigger. So you can still do all that stuff. You still control the individual controls, but the position is controlled by the grid panel layout. And then the control collection is how you can tweak that. So the scaled layout, at first, I think is not very useful because if you see there, you have this stretched, distorted controls here because these controls are placed in a scaled layout and the scaled layout was stretched and you get this distorted view. That's not very useful. I don't like that distorted. It doesn't look good to me. There might be a situation where you do want that though, so that could be useful. But if you set the align of the scaled layout to fit, it maintains the aspect ratio. And so by doing that, then you can have it stretch and it will grow according to the aspect ratio, which I think is way more useful. So it's important that you, when using these layouts, you get a real good understanding of them so that you can use them in the way you'd expect it. Because when I first wanted to use scaled layout, I wanted to maintain aspect ratio and it didn't. But by setting align to fit, it does maintain aspect ratio. So now we've got down a scaled layout. Now, at the design time, it doesn't do anything interesting. It behaves like a regular layout. But at runtime, when I run this, when you resize the scaled layout, so it's set to client right now, it scales the contents. Now, when you notice that if I don't scale this proportionally, we get some kind of odd looking drawing there because it's stretching it out. I don't like the stretching it out. There might be a situation you like the stretching it out. There you go. You can do it that way. But if you change the alignment of it from client to fit, then when you scale it, notice it always maintains aspect ratio. And so it looks kind of funky. These things still work. Hello. At such a large size, but they do. Now, usually if you're making a user interface that you want to adapt to different screen sizes, scaling up your user interface elements is not the best way to go. You want to create a user interface that adapts dynamically to the different sizes. So you don't want, that's not a very exciting form, that's that huge with such big buttons. There may be situations when you do want to do that though, and it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And so it's great that you have the flexibility to be able to deal with this if that's what you need in that situation. So there you go, that's the scaled layout.